My twin sister showed up the night before my husband's funeral to gloat about ruining my life. She didn't know our entire family was listening from behind her. My twin sister only found out I was pregnant 3 weeks ago, and she'd been texting me cruel messages ever since. Not because she wanted to celebrate becoming an aunt, but because she needed fresh ammunition to hurt me with. She didn't know this ammunition would come back to hurt her instead. Stress eating again? Was the first thing she said when she stumbled in my front door completely uninvited. That dress barely fit you last month. Good thing James isn't alive to see you letting yourself go. I kept my face neutral even though my stomach churned. I could have chosen to cry, really cry, like all those other times when she kicked while I was at rock bottom. But instead I chose to be strategic. You know what's funny? I said softly. Even after all the bad luck the universe gave me, I still ended up happier than you. Her eye twitched as I hit a nerve. She'd never been able to keep her mouth shut when she was proud about something, and ruining my life was no different. You still don't get it, do you? She started off, her wine sloshing in the bottle she'd brought. You think all your bad luck was the universe? Poor, pathetic Katie with her terrible life. She continued. What are you talking about? I made my own voice small, vulnerable, pretending to be shocked. In reality, this is the moment I'd been waiting 20 years for. Well, for starters, Michael didn't ghost you in senior year. Her words slurred. I screwed him in your bed wearing your perfume, then convinced him you'd been cheating the whole time. He still can't look at either of us. That's impossible, I whispered, fake tears forming on my eyes. You were at Mom's that weekend. You were helping with her surgery. Gosh, you really are a little slow. She was enjoying making fun of me, thinking we were alone, thinking I was actually broken and not minutes away from taking everything that is meaningful from her. Remember when you lost the baby at 16 weeks? She was practically glowing now. Weird how it happened right after I made you that special smoothie. I gripped the back of the couch, my knuckles white. How? I asked, making my voice break, continuing my carefully crafted performance. How did you get away with all of it? Mom and Dad always take your side, but surely someone would have noticed. The best part? She was still beaming. Being your twin means I can be you anywhere. So no matter what I do, Mom still thinks I'm the angel. Remember when my son told Mom he saw you steal from her purse? I coached him for a week, gave him ice cream every time he practiced the lie. Even my idiot husband thinks I'm perfect. You're lying, I whispered, playing my part. You wouldn't. You couldn't have. At least my husband James loved me, I said quietly. At least I had that. One person who really knew me. Her face went dark. Savage. Then she leaned in close, her breath hot on my face, and said the words that broke us both. Want to know the best part? When James was dying, when he called from his deployment overseas, I was the last person he spoke to. Told him you were already moving on. He died thinking you didn't love him. The world stopped. Everything else I'd suspected. But this was new information. My knees buckled. She may have devastated me, but she also just put the final nail in her own coffin. What's wrong? She was laughing. Did I finally find the one that hurt? I knew you'd finally show them who you really are. My voice was hollow as I walked to the front door. 28 years had led to this moment. 28 years of being called crazy. Where are you going? She called out, amused. Can't handle the truth? Running away like you always do? I pulled the door open, and the porch light illuminated them all. The wine bottle slipped from my sister's fingers and shattered. Dad helped Mom to her feet, and when he spoke, his voice was eerily calm. We put the house in your name because you said Katie was on drugs. We're filing fraud charges tomorrow and transferring it back. Mom was shaking so hard she could barely stand. I've been sending you $2,000 a month, she whispered. Every month for 5 years, thinking Katie was the irresponsible one. Her voice cracked. Never again. The will, the trust fund, we're changing everything tomorrow, Dad continued, still in that terrifying calm voice. Everything goes to Katie. Then her son, her quiet 7-year-old, stepped forward. Why did you say those mean things about Aunt Katie? His voice cracked. I want to live with Daddy. Sweetheart, you don't understand. He backed away from her reaching hands. That's when her husband silently removed his wedding ring and let it fall onto my walkway. The small clink echoed in the silence. My lawyer will handle the custody arrangement. Don't come to the house. James's mother finally found her voice. You let my boy die thinking he wasn't loved. Each word was precise, sharp as glass. You're dead to us. Marco, James's army comrade, stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might actually do something, but he just stood there, fists clenched. He called out for her, he said quietly, when he was dying. Called for Katie, and you. My sister stood there in the broken glass, swaying slightly, her face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before. She bent down slowly and picked up a large shard of the broken wine bottle. If I can't have a life, she said, her voice different now, empty. Neither can you. She took a step toward me, glass glinting in the porch light, and that's when she did something I'll never forget. Marco moved faster than I thought possible. His hand shot out and caught my sister's wrist mid-swing, twisting it hard enough that she screamed and dropped the glass. The shard hit the concrete and shattered into smaller pieces. Dad already had his phone out, his voice steady as he told the 911 operator we needed police right now. Someone was trying to hurt his daughter with a weapon. Mom pushed past Marco and put herself between me and my sister, her whole body shaking so hard I could see it. My sister tried to lunge forward again, but Marco had both her wrists now, holding her away from us while she sobbed and screamed words that didn't make sense. The broken wine bottle pieces crunched under everyone's feet. My hand went to my stomach without thinking, protecting the baby from all of this chaos. My sister kept trying to break free from Marco's grip, her face red and twisted with something I'd never seen before. Dad stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, answering questions in that eerily calm voice while watching his daughter fall apart on my front walkway. James's mother stood frozen near the porch steps, her face white. My nephew was crying now, hiding behind his father's legs. The whole scene felt surreal, like watching it happen to someone else. 2 patrol cars pulled up within 6 minutes, their lights cutting through the darkness and making my quiet street look like a crime scene. The officers got out fast and took in the situation immediately. One of them, a tall guy with gray hair, went straight to Marco and my sister. The other officer, a woman with her hair pulled back tight, came to me and Mom. She asked if I was hurt, and I shook my head, but my voice wouldn't work right. The male officer was talking to Marco in a low voice, getting him to release my sister's wrists so he could take over. My sister was still crying and yelling, her words slurred from the wine. The female officer guided me toward my front door, one hand on my elbow like she thought I might fall. Mom followed us. Dad was talking to another officer who'd appeared from the second car, pointing at the broken glass and explaining what happened. I heard him use the word assault and weapon, and it made everything feel more real. The officer asked if we could go inside, so I could give a statement away from all the chaos. My legs felt shaky going up my own porch steps. Inside my house, the officer brought me a glass of water from my kitchen without asking where things were. I couldn't hold it steady. The water sloshed against the sides as my hands trembled. She sat across from me at my dining table and pulled out a small notebook. Mom stood near the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. The officer asked me to tell her what happened, starting from the beginning. My voice came out flat and distant, like it belonged to someone else. I told her about my sister showing up drunk, about the confession she made, about everyone on the porch hearing it. The officer wrote quickly, asking specific questions about threats and what exactly my sister said. When I got to the part about the glass shard, my hand moved to my stomach again. The officer noticed and asked if I was pregnant. I nodded. She made a note of that, underlining something. Then she asked if I had any security cameras. The question hit me like electricity. My Ring doorbell. It had been recording everything. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened the app. The officer moved her chair next to mine so she could see the screen. There it was, timestamp and everything. My sister's voice coming through crystal clear, confessing to poisoning my smoothie years ago, to sabotaging my relationships, to lying to James before he died. Every cruel word captured in perfect audio. The officer's whole demeanor changed. She asked if she could use my phone to call someone and I handed it over. She stepped away and spoke in a low voice to whoever answered. I heard her say, recorded confession, and multiple potential charges, and need a detective out here now. She came back and explained that this footage was crucial evidence for building a case against my sister. She asked if I'd be willing to provide it officially, and I said yes immediately. Within an hour, a detective showed up at my door. He was older, maybe 50, with tired eyes and a calm way of moving that made me feel safer. He introduced himself as Detective Harold Ballard and asked permission to come in. He sat at my table and listened to the whole story again, taking his own notes. Then he asked to see the Ring footage. I pulled it up and watched him watch it, his face staying neutral even when my sister confessed to the worst things. He asked if he could download the footage to an official device for evidence. I agreed without hesitation. He pulled out some kind of tablet and walked me through the process of transferring the video file. He explained that this recording could support charges for assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threats, and possibly other offenses. He treated everything seriously, like a real crime instead of just a family fight. That meant more to me than I could explain. While Detective Ballard was still at my house, I heard sirens outside again. Through my front window, I saw an ambulance pulling up. The officers had called it for my sister. Mom made a choking sound and rushed outside. I followed slower, still feeling disconnected from my own body. My sister was sitting on the curb now, an officer standing nearby. She looked smaller somehow, hunched over with her hands cuffed in front of her. The paramedics were talking to her, checking her eyes with a light, asking questions she wasn't answering clearly. One of the officers came over to explain that due to my sister's intoxication level and the risk she posed to herself and others, they were taking her to the hospital for psychiatric evaluation. She'd be held for at least 72 hours for assessment. They were also initiating an emergency protective order that would prohibit any contact with me. The words washed over me like I was underwater. Mom was crying so hard she could barely stand. Dad had his arm around her, holding her up as they watched the paramedics load their other daughter into the ambulance. My sister looked at me once as they closed the doors. Her face was empty, like someone had turned off all the lights inside her. The ambulance pulled away with its lights still flashing, but no siren. After the ambulance left, James's mother approached me carefully. Her face still looked frozen in shock. She asked quietly if she could come inside to talk. I nodded and led her back into my house. Marco followed a few steps behind, positioning himself near the doorway like a guard. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd sat 1,000 times before, but everything felt different now. James's mother's hands twisted in her lap. Then she started apologizing. For every cold word she'd said to me after James died. For every accusation. For every moment, she'd blamed me instead of supporting me. For believing I'd moved on when he was dying. The words came out broken by tears. I started crying too, finally able to grieve with someone who loved James as much as I did. She told me about the phone call, how my sister had answered my phone and told James I was out with someone else, that I'd been seeing other people while he was deployed, how James had been confused and hurt, asking to talk to me directly, but my sister said I didn't want to talk to him, how that lie had poisoned his last hours. We cried together on my couch, Marco standing silent watch, until we were both empty. Around midnight, my brother-in-law took my nephew home. The little boy was exhausted and scared, his eyes red from crying. Before they left, my brother-in-law pulled me aside. He spoke quietly so his son wouldn't hear. He was filing for emergency custody in the morning. He asked if I'd be willing to provide a statement supporting his petition. I agreed immediately. My nephew needed stability and safety, not the chaos my sister would bring into his life. I watched them walk to their car, my nephew holding his father's hand tight. The boy looked back at me once before getting in, his face confused and sad. I waved and he waved back. Then they were gone and my street was quiet again except for the last patrol car pulling away. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed with one hand on my belly, feeling the baby move and kick. 28 years of betrayal kept playing through my mind like a movie I couldn't turn off. Every bad thing that had happened to me, every piece of terrible luck, all of it had been her. My phone buzzed at 6 in the morning. Anne Haynes, the therapist I'd seen after James died. She'd seen something on the local police scanner report and wanted to know if I was okay. I called her immediately, my voice cracking as I tried to explain. She listened without interrupting and then told me she had an opening that afternoon, that I should come in. I agreed. I needed help processing this before it broke me. Detective Ballard came back the next morning with another woman. She introduced herself as a victim advocate and explained she was there to help me understand my rights and options. They sat at my dining table again, the same spot where I'd given my statement hours earlier. Detective Ballard explained that the ring footage had captured everything from the moment I opened the door. My sister's confession to poisoning my smoothie years ago, her admission about sabotaging my relationships, her lie to James before he died, all of it recorded with timestamps and clear audio. He said they were considering charges for assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threats, and potentially more serious offenses related to the pregnancy loss she'd caused. The victim advocate walked me through what each charge meant, what the process would look like, how long things might take. She gave me pamphlets and phone numbers. Detective Ballard asked if I wanted to press charges officially. I looked at both of them and said yes without hesitation. My voice was steady this time. My parents arrived mid-morning looking like they'd aged a decade overnight. Dad's hands shook as he handed me a folder. Inside was documentation of the fraudulent property transfer, the house that should have been mine, but my sister had stolen by claiming I was on drugs. He'd already contacted their attorney about filing charges and reversing the deed. His voice stayed steady as he explained the legal process, but his hands kept shaking. Mom couldn't look at me directly. Her guilt filled the room like smoke, thick and choking. She tried to apologize, but the words came out broken. I told them I needed time, that I appreciated the documentation, but I couldn't process their apologies right now. Dad nodded and said they understood. They left the folder on my table and let themselves out. Through my front window, I watched them sit in their car for a long time before driving away. Neither of them looked at my sister's house across the street. That afternoon, I sat in the exam room at Dr. Woodward's office, the paper crinkling under me as I tried to stay still. She came in with her tablet and a calm expression that made me want to cry just from the kindness in it. She asked me to describe what happened, and I gave her the short version while she typed notes. Then she had me lie back for the ultrasound, and I watched the screen as she moved the wand across my belly. The baby was moving. Little flutters and kicks that showed up as motion on the grainy image. Dr. Woodward pointed to the heartbeat and said it looked strong and steady. She measured different parts and took screenshots, her face focused but not worried. Then she checked my blood pressure 3 times because the first reading was high. She wrote down the numbers and said it was raised but not dangerous, just something to watch. I showed her the scratches on my arm from when Marco grabbed my sister's wrist and the glass fell. They were shallow, barely breaking the skin, but Dr. Woodward photographed them anyway with her phone and printed the images for my records. She added them to a report she was writing that documented the stress event and my physical state. Before I left, she scheduled me for weekly appointments instead of monthly ones, saying we needed to monitor things closely given everything happening. I drove home feeling like at least the baby was okay, which was the only thing keeping me together. The next morning, I met with the attorney my parents hired, a man named Morrow who had an office downtown in a building with too much marble. He shook my hand and offered me coffee, which I accepted just to have something to hold. We sat at his conference table and he opened a thick folder with my name on it. He explained that he would be handling both the criminal case coordination and the civil remedies for the property fraud. His voice was steady and professional as he walked me through what each process would involve. The criminal case was in the DA's hands, but he would coordinate with them and represent my interests. The property fraud was a separate civil matter that would take months to resolve through the courts. He was clear about the timeline being long and the process being hard on me emotionally, but he said the evidence was overwhelming, especially with the doorbell footage and multiple witnesses. I signed papers authorizing him to coordinate with Detective Ballard and represent me in all legal matters. He asked detailed questions about my sister's past behavior, and I told him everything I could remember. He took notes and said he would compile a comprehensive file. When I left his office 2 hours later, I felt like I had handed off a huge weight to someone who could actually carry it. Detective Ballard called me that evening with an update about my sister. The 72-hour psychiatric hold had been extended to a full week after her evaluation. The doctors found severe personality disorder traits and said she was still a risk. Her attorney, someone named Powers, had contacted Morrow trying to set up some kind of negotiation. I told Morrow through a quick call that I refused all contact except through legal counsel. No calls, no letters, no messages through family. Nothing. The protective order hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which gave me temporary space to breathe. Detective Ballard said the emergency order was still in effect until then, meaning she couldn't come near me or my house. I thanked him and hung up, then sat on my couch staring at nothing for a while. My brother-in-law filed for emergency custody the same week. I found out when he texted me asking if I would provide a written statement supporting his petition. I said yes immediately, and spent an hour writing out what I witnessed, what my nephew said, how scared he looked. The court granted temporary placement with him pending a full hearing. They assigned a child counselor named Sterling to work with my nephew, someone who specialized in helping kids process family trauma. She met with him several times that first week. My brother-in-law told me later that my nephew said he was scared of his mom now and didn't want to see her. Hearing that broke something in me, even though I knew he was safer this way. He was 7 years old and his whole world had exploded. I wrote another statement for the counselor describing what I saw that night, how my sister tried to attack me in front of him, how he begged to live with his daddy. The next few days passed in a weird fog. I went to work and came home and took care of basic tasks, but my brain felt like it was trying to process too much information at once. 28 years of memories were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns. Things I had blamed myself for suddenly had different explanations. Anne fit me in for extra sessions that week. During one of them, she had me create a timeline on a big piece of paper. We listed every major bad thing that had happened to me going back to high school. Then we went through each one and marked which ones my sister had confessed to, or which ones matched her pattern. Seeing it laid out visually made something click. The sabotage wasn't random bad luck. It was targeted and consistent and deliberate. I felt validated and furious at the same time. The anger was uncomfortable because I wasn't used to feeling it. I had spent so long being sad and defeated, but Anne said the anger was healthy and necessary, that I needed to feel it instead of pushing it down. Detective Ballard called again a few days later. He said they were moving forward with charges for assault with a deadly weapon and criminal threats. They were also investigating the pregnancy loss as potential assault causing injury. The DA's office was reviewing the confession recording to determine if it was admissible and what other charges might apply. He asked if I wanted to formally press charges, and I said yes without hesitating. My voice stayed steady as I gave consent to pursue every legal avenue available. He said someone from the DA's office would contact me soon to go over my options and what to expect. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and cried for the first time since that night. Not sad crying, angry crying, the kind that leaves you shaking and exhausted. Marco texted me asking if he could visit. I said yes, and he came over the next afternoon carrying a cardboard box. He set it on my coffee table carefully and said James's mother wanted me to have it. Inside were James's personal things from his deployment. Letters he had written but never sent, dozens of them in his handwriting. Photos from our wedding that he had kept with him. His dog tags on the chain he always wore. I picked up the letters with shaking hands, and Marco said I didn't have to read them now. But then he started telling me stories about James's final weeks, how he talked about me constantly, how he counted the days until he could come home, how he showed everyone our wedding photos and bragged about his wife. Marco's voice cracked when he said James called out for me when he was dying. Not for his mom or anyone else. For me. I held the dog tags and cried while Marco sat there quietly, letting me process it. The doorbell footage got formally entered into evidence that same week. A tech team verified its authenticity and created something called a chain of custody certification. Morrow called to explain that this recording was devastating evidence because my sister had confessed to specific crimes with multiple witnesses present who could back up what they heard. The DA was building a case that went beyond simple assault. They were looking at a pattern of long-term criminal behavior, identity theft, fraud, intentional harm. The recording captured all of it with timestamps and clear audio. Morrow said this was the kind of evidence that could support multiple charges and make a plea deal more likely because going to trial would be suicide for her defense. My parents met with their financial advisor to document everything they had sent my sister over 5 years. It added up to $120,000, money they thought was going to me to help me recover after James died. Dad was pursuing fraud charges for the property transfer and demanding full restitution. He called me after the meeting and said they had everything documented and ready to file. Then he put Mom on the phone. She apologized through sobs so hard I could barely understand her. She said she was sorry for believing the lies, for not protecting me, for choosing my sister over me again and again. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened until she stopped talking. Then I told her I needed time to process everything. She said she understood and that she loved me. I said I loved her too, which was true even though I was still angry. I spent that evening scrolling through Facebook until I found Michael's profile. My high school boyfriend who ghosted me senior year. I stared at his page for a long time before typing out a message. I kept it simple. asking if he would be willing to talk about what happened between us back then. I explained that I had recently learned some things and needed to understand what really went down. I hit send before I could overthink it. He responded within an hour. He said he had wondered for years if I ever learned the truth. He said he would be happy to meet me for coffee that weekend and explain everything. I agreed and we set a time and place. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, thinking about how many lies I was still uncovering. That Saturday, I walked into the coffee shop 15 minutes early and picked a corner table where I could see the door. Michael arrived right on time carrying a manila folder that looked thick enough to contain years of secrets. He looked older, but I recognized him right away. Same dark hair and nervous habit of adjusting his glasses. He sat down across from me and opened the folder without any small talk. Inside were printed Facebook messages, screenshots of texts and photos I had never seen before. He spread them across the table between us and pointed to a conversation thread from 10 years ago. The messages showed my sister using my name and profile picture, talking to Michael about hooking up with someone else. He pulled out another printout showing the metadata proving the messages came from her IP address, not mine. Then he showed me photos of us from senior year, and in 3 of them you could see my sister in the background watching us. He explained how she had shown up at his dorm that weekend wearing the same perfume I always wore, how she knew things only I should have known, how she convinced him I had been cheating with his roommate. He said he broke things off without even talking to me because he was hurt and angry. Then he showed me the fake text messages she had created, screenshots that looked like they came from my phone, but the timestamps did not match up with when I actually had my phone. He had kept everything because something felt wrong about the whole situation, but he could not figure out what. Now he knew she had pretended to be me and destroyed our relationship on purpose. I took photos of everything with my phone and asked if I could keep the originals. He said yes and apologized 3 more times for believing her lies. I told him it was not his fault, that she had fooled everyone including our parents for decades. We talked for another hour about what she had done and how long this had been going on. He said he would help however he could, that he wanted to make up for not questioning things back then. I thanked him and left with the folder tucked under my arm, already planning my next move. The next morning, I called Detective Ballard and asked if I could bring him some new evidence. He told me to come by the station that afternoon. I showed up with the manila folder and explained everything Michael had given me. Ballard went through each document carefully, taking notes and asking questions about dates and details. He said this evidence showed a clear pattern of identity theft and fraud going back years. He explained that having proof she had impersonated me multiple times strengthened the current case because it proved this was not just one bad decision, but a long history of planned deception. He added the documents to his growing file and said the DA would want to see this. Then he asked if Michael would be willing to give a sworn statement and testify if needed. I texted Michael right there and he responded within minutes saying yes to both. Ballard scheduled him to come in later that week to make his official statement. James Morrow called me that evening after Ballard contacted him about the new evidence. He said this kind of historical documentation was exactly what they needed to build a strong case. It showed my sister had been systematically sabotaging my life for years, not just acting out in one moment of crisis. He explained that pattern evidence made it harder for her attorney to claim she was just having a mental health episode, or that the porch confession was exaggerated. This was documented proof of deliberate, repeated criminal behavior over time. 2 weeks after the attack, I sat in the courtroom with James Morrow, while my sister appeared on a video screen from the psychiatric facility. Her hair was pulled back and she wore a plain gray shirt, looking smaller and quieter than I had ever seen her. The judge reviewed the doorbell camera footage first, watching the whole confession, and attempted attack without any expression on his face. Then he read through the witness statements from Mom, Dad, James's mother, Marco, and my brother-in-law. My sister's attorney argued she was severely mentally ill and needed treatment, not punishment, that putting a protective order in place would interfere with her recovery and family reconciliation. The judge cut him off and said mental health treatment and legal consequences were not mutually exclusive. He granted a 1-year restraining order prohibiting any contact with me directly or indirectly, no coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, no phone calls or messages or social media contact. My sister started crying on the video screen, but the judge ignored it and moved on to the next case. Morrow walked me out and said this was a good outcome, that having the order in place gave me legal protection if she tried anything. I felt relieved and exhausted at the same time. My sister got released from the psychiatric hold 3 days later, but not to freedom. She had to enter a required outpatient treatment program with strict rules including therapy every week, taking her medications and random drug tests to make sure she was following through. She was not allowed to go back to her house because my brother-in-law had his own protective order for himself and their son. That meant she had to live with Mom and Dad temporarily. Mom called me the day after she moved in and said it felt weird and uncomfortable having her there. She said it was like living with a stranger who just happened to look exactly like someone she used to know. Dad got on the phone and told me they had set up rules including no alcohol in the house, no going out without telling them where, and weekly family therapy sessions. He sounded tired and sad, like he had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. I did not feel sorry for them exactly, but I understood they were dealing with their own version of grief, mourning the daughter they thought they had. 3 weeks after everything happened, I sat in another courtroom for the custody hearing. Regina Sterling, the child counselor who had been working with my nephew, gave a detailed report to the judge. She said my nephew had told her multiple times he felt scared of his mother now, and did not want to see her. She recommended primary custody go to his father with supervised visits for my sister only twice a month at a family center. The visits would depend on her staying in treatment and getting good reports from her therapist. I had submitted a written statement supporting my brother-in-law's request for custody. In it, I described the confession, the attack, and my concerns about my nephew's safety, based on everything my sister had admitted to doing. The judge read my statement out loud in court, and my sister's attorney objected, but the judge overruled him. Then the judge granted primary custody to my brother-in-law exactly like Regina Sterling had recommended. My sister would get 2 supervised visits per month starting in 30 days, but only if her treatment team said she was stable enough. She could not take my nephew anywhere alone, and she could not discuss the case or say bad things about anyone in the family during visits. If she broke any rules, the visits would stop immediately. My brother-in-law looked relieved when the judge made the final order. I was glad my nephew would be safe and have stability while everything else was chaos. James's mother called me a few days after the custody hearing and asked if I would meet her for lunch. We met at a quiet restaurant and ended up talking for 3 hours. She cried and I cried and we held hands across the table like we used to before James died. She told me how the lie about me moving on had poisoned everything for her. How she had spent 2 years angry at me instead of supporting me through our shared grief. She said she had blamed me for not being there when James died, for not fighting harder to talk to him one last time, for seemingly getting over him so fast. Now she knew none of that was true. Now she knew my sister had deliberately destroyed the one relationship that could have helped us both heal. We talked about James for hours, sharing memories and stories and all the things we missed about him. She showed me photos on her phone that I had never seen, pictures from his childhood and his time in the army. We agreed to meet regularly, maybe once a week for coffee or lunch, to keep his memory alive between us. Then she asked if she could be involved with the baby, if she could be a grandmother to her son's child. I said yes immediately because I wanted my daughter to know about her father through the person who loved him first. We hugged in the parking lot before leaving, and it felt like something broken was starting to heal. I was 16 weeks pregnant now and starting to show enough that I could not hide it anymore. My regular clothes did not fit right, and I had to start wearing loose dresses and stretchy pants. The reality of single parenthood hit me hard during my next therapy session with Anne. I told her I was scared of doing this alone, of raising a baby while dealing with criminal trials and family trauma, and all the aftermath of everything that happened. Anne helped me work through the fear by making me create what she called a support network map. I had to write down everyone I could rely on for different kinds of help. I was surprised by how many names I wrote down. James's mother for emotional support and baby advice, Marco for practical help and male perspective, my parents for financial backup and childcare, my brother-in-law for understanding what it was like dealing with my sister's destruction, Anne herself for therapy and processing, my coworkers for workplace flexibility. I stared at the list and realized I was not as alone as I felt. I had built a network of people who actually cared about me, people who had proven themselves when everything fell apart. Detective Ballard called me 2 days later with news I was not expecting. He said they were pursuing additional charges related to the pregnancy loss I had suffered years ago. Specifically, they were looking into whether my sister's special smoothie had contained substances meant to cause a miscarriage. He explained the statute of limitations had not run out yet, and the recorded confession gave them probable cause to investigate. They needed my medical records from that loss, all the documentation from the hospital and my doctor. I had to go dig through old files I had not looked at in years, reopening wounds I thought had finally scarred over. Reading through the emergency room notes and the ultrasound report where they could not find a heartbeat anymore made me cry for an hour. I scanned everything and emailed it to Ballard, then called Anne and made an emergency appointment because I could not handle processing this alone. She helped me understand that getting justice for that loss did not mean I had to relive all the pain, that I could acknowledge what happened without letting it consume me again. My parents' attorney filed a civil lawsuit against my sister the following week. The suit demanded return of the house that had been fraudulently transferred to her name and full restitution of the $120,000 they had sent her over 5 years. James Morrow explained the case was strong because she had obtained the property by making false statements about me being on drugs. He said the civil case would proceed separately from the criminal charges, and we would likely win a judgment even if she had no money or assets to actually pay it. The important thing was establishing legal liability and getting the property back in the right hands. He walked me through the timeline, explaining it would take months to get through discovery and depositions before we even got to trial. I told him I understood and that I was in this for the long term. I wanted every legal remedy available, every consequence she had coming. Not for revenge exactly, but for accountability. For proof that actions have consequences and you cannot just destroy people without facing justice. That evening, I pulled out old journals and emails going back 10 years. I went through everything systematically, looking for incidents I had always blamed on bad luck or my own failures. Now I understood they were deliberate sabotage and I wanted to find the evidence. I found an email from a job I did not get, saying they had received concerning information about me during the reference check. I found journal entries about friends who suddenly stopped talking to me for reasons I never understood. I found documentation of a car accident where the mechanic said my brake line looked like it had been deliberately cut, but I thought he was wrong. I found medical records from food poisoning that sent me to the emergency room the night before a big presentation. Pattern after pattern emerged as I went through years of documentation. Finding my sister's fingerprints all over my past felt like digging through a crime scene in my own life. Every incident I had internalized as my fault or bad luck was actually her working behind the scenes to destroy me. I took photos of everything and organized it chronologically in a folder on my computer. Then I called Detective Ballard and told him I had more evidence to add to his file. He said to bring it by the station the next day. I spent the rest of the night going through more boxes, finding more proof, building a complete picture of decades of identity theft, fraud, and intentional harm. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I had documented over 40 separate incidents where she had sabotaged my life. 40 times she had pretended to be me, lied about me, or directly harmed me while everyone thought I was just unlucky or incompetent. The evidence was overwhelming, and Detective Ballard was building a case that would show exactly who my sister really was. 3 weeks after I handed over all the evidence to Detective Ballard, the DA's office called me in for a meeting. They sat me down in a conference room with harsh fluorescent lighting and told me they were moving forward with charges against my sister for assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threats, identity theft, and fraud. The prosecutor explained they were still looking into the pregnancy loss from years ago, but proving she intended to cause harm with that smoothie was nearly impossible despite her confession on tape. The recording gave them her words, but medical experts couldn't definitively link specific substances to the miscarriage after all this time. I felt disappointed but understood the limitations of what they could prove in court. Randolph Powers, my sister's attorney, immediately started calling James Morrow trying to negotiate some kind of plea arrangement, but the DA wasn't interested in deals yet, given how many crimes she'd committed over such a long period. 2 days later, I got a call from Anne asking me to come in for an emergency session, because my sister's treatment team had filed a report with the court. When I arrived at her office, Anne showed me the document explaining that my sister was barely participating in her mandatory therapy and refused to take responsibility for anything she'd done. According to her therapists, she was now claiming the whole confession was exaggerated because she was drunk, and that I had somehow set her up and manipulated the situation to make her look bad. Reading those words made my hands shake with anger because she was still lying, still trying to twist reality to make herself the victim. Anne waited until I finished reading before pointing out something I hadn't considered. The fact that my sister was deflecting blame and showing no genuine remorse actually helped our case because it demonstrated to the judge that she hadn't learned anything and posed an ongoing risk. Courts take lack of remorse seriously when deciding sentences and protective order durations. I left feeling slightly better, understanding that her own behavior was building the case against her stronger than any evidence I could provide. That weekend, 2 messages showed up in my Facebook inbox from people I hadn't heard from in years. The first was from Sarah, a friend from college who I'd lost touch with junior year, under circumstances I never fully understood. She wrote that Michael had posted something vague about discovering he'd been lied to about someone years ago, and it made her wonder if the same thing had happened to her. Sarah explained that during our junior year, someone who looked exactly like me had shown up at a party and told everyone I'd been talking badly about them behind their backs. She'd confronted me about it, and I had no idea what she was talking about, which made her think I was lying. Now she realized it had been my twin sister impersonating me and destroying my friendship systematically. The second message came from David, someone I'd worked with at a retail job 5 years ago. He said he'd heard through mutual friends about what happened and wanted me to know that my sister had called the store manager pretending to be me, saying I was quitting without notice. I'd shown up for my next shift completely confused about why I'd been terminated, and the manager showed me the call log with my phone number. I'd thought it was some kind of billing error or system glitch. David had kept the incident report because something felt off about the whole situation, and he was willing to provide it as evidence if I needed it. I forwarded both messages to Detective Ballard and James Morrow, feeling validated and devastated in equal measure. Every new piece of information revealed just how extensive my sister's campaign against me had been, spanning decades and touching every part of my life. At my 20-week ultrasound appointment, Dr. Woodward moved the wand across my belly and told me I was having a girl. I started crying right there on the exam table, thinking about James and how much he would have loved having a daughter. When I called James's mother that evening to tell her, she cried too, happy tears mixed with grief for her son who would never meet his child. We talked for over an hour about baby names and nursery colors, and she asked if she could buy the crib as her gift. I agreed immediately, touched by how much she wanted to be involved and contribute to her granddaughter's life. We started planning a small baby shower together, just close family and friends who had supported me through everything, not the big celebration I might have had in different circumstances. The following Tuesday, my parents' attorney filed the final paperwork, and the judge signed an order reversing the fraudulent property transfer. The house that my sister had stolen through lies about me being on drugs was officially back in my name. She was ordered to vacate within 30 days, but since she was already living with our parents in their house, there was no physical drama involved in the transfer. Dad came over that same afternoon with a locksmith and had all the locks changed anyway, handing me the only set of keys in a gesture that felt more symbolic than practical. He didn't say much, just hugged me tight and told me the house had always belonged to me, and now the paperwork finally reflected that truth. My brother-in-law's divorce filing moved forward rapidly once his attorney submitted the doorbell camera footage and documentation of my sister's confession. He was seeking primary custody of my nephew, with only supervised visitation for my sister, and his lawyer used the criminal charges and protective orders as evidence that she posed a risk to their son's well-being. His attorney contacted me asking for another written statement, this time specifically about my nephew, and why I thought supervised visitation was necessary. I spent an entire evening writing 3 pages about the incident where she'd coached him to lie about me stealing, about how she'd tried to attack me in front of him, about the importance of protecting his emotional safety during this chaotic time. I submitted it to the court knowing I was helping take a mother away from her child, but also knowing that child deserved better than what she could offer right now. Detective Ballard called me into the station 6 weeks after opening his investigation into the pregnancy loss. He sat across from me in the same interview room where I'd given my original statement and explained that he was closing that particular aspect of the case. He'd consulted with 3 different medical experts who all said the same thing, that while certain substances could potentially cause miscarriage, proving specific intent and direct causation from an incident years ago was impossible. The confession gave us her words admitting she'd done something to that smoothie, but without knowing exactly what she'd put in it or having any physical evidence, there was no way to build a prosecutable case. I felt disappointed, but I understood the limitations of what the legal system could do. At least the recording gave me personal certainty about what she'd done, even if we couldn't hold her criminally responsible for it. 2 weeks later, James Morrow called saying the DA had put together a plea deal offer. My sister would plead guilty to assault with a deadly weapon and identity theft, receive 3 years probation instead of jail time, continue mandatory mental health treatment, maintain all protective orders, and pay restitution for damages. Randolph Powers was recommending she accept, because going to trial risked a much harsher sentence, including potential jail time. James explained this was actually a reasonable outcome that held her accountable, while avoiding the trauma of a trial, where I'd have to testify and relive everything in front of a jury. Before my sister could accept or reject the deal, the DA scheduled a victim impact session where I could provide input on the terms. I sat in another sterile conference room and told the prosecutor I wanted accountability and protection more than punishment. The protective orders mattered more to me than jail time. The mandatory treatment mattered because maybe it would actually help her. I also requested restitution for my therapy costs, and for the money my parents had sent her over 5 years thinking it was going to me. The DA took notes and nodded, incorporating my requests into the final offer they'd present. 3 days before the trial was scheduled to begin, my sister accepted the plea deal. James Morrow picked me up and drove me to the courthouse where I sat in the gallery with my parents watching her stand before the judge. She wore a conservative dress and kept her eyes down as she pleaded guilty to the reduced charges. The judge asked if she wanted to make a statement, and she read something brief from a piece of paper her attorney had prepared, apologizing for her actions and promising to do better. It felt hollow and scripted, words chosen to satisfy the court rather than express genuine remorse. The judge sentenced her according to the plea agreement, and then looked directly at her with a stern expression, warning that any violations of the protective orders or probation terms would result in immediate jail time. She nodded silently and was led away by her probation officer for processing, while I sat there feeling strange and empty, like I'd been holding my breath for months, and finally exhaled, but couldn't quite figure out how to breathe normally again. The restitution hearing happened 2 weeks later in a smaller courtroom with just me, James Morrow, my sister, and Randolph Powers present. The judge reviewed the financial documentation my parents provided showing $120,000 sent over 5 years, plus my therapy bills totaling $8,000. James Morrow explained to me beforehand that we were asking for $58,000 total with a payment plan structured over her 3-year probation period. My sister sat at the defendant's table looking down at her hands while the judge outlined the payment schedule, roughly $1,600 monthly. Powers tried arguing she had limited income and couldn't afford those payments, but the judge cut him off and said the judgment stood regardless of her ability to pay. James leaned over and whispered that collecting would be challenging since she worked part-time retail, but we could pursue wage garnishment and other collection methods if she defaulted. I nodded, knowing it was more about the principle than actually getting the money back. The judge banged his gavel and my sister signed the restitution agreement without looking at me once. Walking out of the courthouse, James told me to keep detailed records of any payments received and report immediately if she missed any. 3 days after that hearing, my brother-in-law texted asking if I could meet him for coffee to discuss the custody arrangement. We sat in a quiet corner booth while he showed me the finalized custody order on his phone. He had primary custody with my sister getting supervised visitation twice monthly at a family center downtown. Regina Sterling would continue working with my nephew and monitoring the visits to make sure they weren't harmful. My brother-in-law looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and he told me his son had been asking about me lately. The kid wanted to know if he could meet the baby when she was born, which made my chest tight with emotion. I told him, of course, that I wanted to maintain connection for my nephew's sake. He thanked me quietly and said Regina reported the boy was adjusting well to the new normal, sleeping better, less anxious at the school. We agreed to set up regular visits once the baby arrived so my nephew could have some stability and positive family connection. That same week, I hit 24 weeks pregnant and started having cramping that scared me enough to call Dr. Woodward's emergency line at midnight. She told me to come in first thing in the morning for monitoring. The ultrasound showed the baby was fine, but my blood pressure was elevated and I was having some early contractions. Dr. Woodward put me on modified bed rest for 2 weeks. No work, limited activity, just rest and monitoring. I called James's mother from the parking lot and she immediately said she was coming to stay with me. She showed up that afternoon with 2 bags of groceries and her overnight bag, setting up in my guest room like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mom texted asking if she could help too, but I wasn't ready for that level of closeness yet, so I told her prepared meals would be appreciated. She started dropping off containers of soup and casseroles every few days, leaving them on the porch with little notes. James's mother cooked, did laundry, kept me company during those 2 weeks, and I realized how much my support network had grown. Anne's office called during my bed rest to reschedule my appointment, and when I explained why, she offered to do a phone session instead. We talked for an hour about the complicated grief of losing my sister even though she was still alive. The twin I thought I knew never really existed, and mourning that imaginary relationship while dealing with the real person's betrayal was uniquely painful. Anne said she wanted to introduce me to her colleague Temperance Haynes, who specialized in family estrangement and reconciliation. I started seeing both of them, Anne for trauma processing and Temperance for family dynamics. My first session with Temperance happened via video call while I was still on bed rest, and she asked detailed questions about my childhood and family patterns. She helped me see how my parents' enabling behavior had created the perfect environment for my sister's manipulation to thrive unchecked. 2 weeks later, when my bed rest ended and I got cleared to resume normal activity, my parents asked through James Morrow if we could do family therapy together. I discussed it extensively with both Anne and Temperance before agreeing cautiously. Our first session was awkward, everyone sitting stiff in Temperance's office, but she guided us through establishing ground rules and goals. The second session was when everything broke open. Dad started crying while admitting he ignored red flags because it was easier than confronting his golden child. He said he saw signs something was wrong with how my sister treated me, but he convinced himself it was normal sibling rivalry. Mom's guilt was so heavy it felt like another barrier between us. Her apologies constant but almost performative. Temperance had to redirect her several times to focus on rebuilding trust through actions rather than just expressing remorse. We agreed to monthly sessions and I set clear boundaries about what I needed from them moving forward. A week after that difficult therapy session, James's mother called saying she and Marco wanted to organize a small memorial service for James, now that the truth about his final call was known. We gathered at the Veterans Cemetery where he was buried on a Saturday morning, just the three of us plus my parents and brother-in-law. Marco brought letters James had written but never sent, pages about loving me and planning our future and counting days until he could come home. Marco read them out loud in his steady military voice while I stood there crying, one hand on James's headstone and one on my belly. It was devastating and healing at the same time, finally able to grieve without my sister's lies poisoning my memories. James's mother placed fresh flowers and we stood there quietly for a long time before leaving. By 30 weeks pregnant, Dr. Woodward was monitoring me closely because of the earlier complications. She connected me with a support group for high-risk pregnancies that met weekly at the hospital. I walked into that first meeting nervous and found 8 other women in various stages of pregnancy, all dealing with difficult circumstances. They shared practical advice about managing stress and bed rest boredom, and their emotional support helped me feel less alone. One woman was on the hospital bed rest for twins. Another had a condition that required weekly monitoring, and hearing their stories put my situation in perspective. The baby shower James's mother planned happened at 32 weeks, small and perfect with just 15 people in her living room. My parents came and gave me a generous check toward baby expenses, their way of trying to make amends financially. My brother-in-law brought my nephew who was excited and kept asking questions about his baby cousin. When the baby kicked hard enough to see through my dress, my nephew carefully touched my belly with wide eyes and asked if she was saying hello to him. Everyone laughed and I felt genuinely happy surrounded by people who cared. 2 days after the shower, I got a message request on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. The profile had no posts and no followers, but the message was long and rambling. My sister apologizing but also accusing everyone of lying about her and manipulating the situation. I screenshot everything immediately and called Detective Ballard. He told me to forward it to my sister's probation officer too, which I did within minutes. The violation hearing happened fast, my sister standing before the same judge who'd sentenced her originally. He extended her probation by 6 months and ordered electronic monitoring, a GPS ankle bracelet she'd have to wear constantly. Randolph Powers looked exhausted, trying to argue she'd just made a mistake, but the judge wasn't having it. At 34 weeks pregnant, I got a call from Regina Sterling saying my sister's supervised visitation had been suspended. Apparently, she spent the entire last session crying and trying to convince my nephew that everyone was lying about her, that I had set her up, that his dad was keeping them apart on purpose. Regina said it was harmful to his progress and recommended 90-day suspension until my sister demonstrated genuine stability. The family court judge agreed, and my brother-in-law texted me after saying his son seemed relieved not to have those visits hanging over him anymore. 2 weeks after the visitation suspension, my parents completed the legal process of changing their will and trust documents. Dad came over with the paperwork to explain everything, his reading glasses sliding down his nose as he walked me through each section. Everything now went to me with specific provisions for my daughter and my nephew, protecting both kids' futures. He sat at my kitchen table and told me this wasn't about punishing my sister, but about protecting family assets from someone who'd proven she couldn't be trusted with money or responsibility. Randolph Powers sent a formal letter of protest to their attorney claiming the changes were made under duress, but Dad's lawyer responded that my parents had every legal right to distribute their estate however they wanted. The protest went nowhere because there was nothing illegal about changing a will based on new information about a beneficiary's character. At 37 weeks pregnant, I woke up at 3 in the morning with contractions that felt different from the practice ones I'd been having. I timed them for an hour before calling James's mother, who arrived at my house within 20 minutes still in her pajamas. She drove me to the hospital while using her phone to call my parents and Marco, her hands steady on the wheel even though I could see the worry in her face. The delivery took 14 hours of hard labor that left me exhausted and shaking, but at 5:32 p.m. my daughter arrived healthy and screaming. She weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces, tiny but perfect with a full head of dark hair like her father's. I named her Jamie after James, and when the nurse placed her in James's mother's arms for the first time, we both cried so hard we could barely see. She whispered to her granddaughter about the daddy who would have loved her so much, and I felt the weight of everything James was missing crash over me again. The first 2 weeks with Jamie were the hardest days of my life in a completely different way than the trauma with my sister. James's mother moved into my guest room and taught me everything about feeding schedules, diaper changes, and recognizing different types of cries. She showed me how to swaddle Jamie tight so she felt secure, how to burp her properly, and how to tell when she was actually hungry versus just fussy. Mom came by every single day bringing containers of soup and casseroles, doing my laundry without being asked, and holding Jamie so I could take a shower. She didn't push for emotional conversations, just quietly helped with the practical stuff that made survival possible. Marco sent a huge care package from his army unit with baby clothes, blankets, and a letter signed by 20 guys welcoming Jamie to their extended family. 3 weeks after Jamie was born, James Morrow called to tell me that Randolph Powers had contacted him with a request from my sister. She wanted permission to send a gift for the baby through her attorney as a peace offering. I said no immediately without even thinking about it, my hand instinctively moving to where Jamie slept in her bassinet next to me. I told James I wasn't ready for any kind of connection between my daughter and the person who'd tried to harm us both when I was pregnant. The protective order still had 8 months remaining, and I planned to maintain every single provision for the full time. Maybe someday I'd feel different about my sister being in Jamie's life, but right now protecting my child was the only thing that mattered. 3 months after giving birth, I returned to work part-time on a schedule that let me be home 4 days a week. Jamie started daycare 3 days a week at a center 2 blocks from my office, and I spent my lunch breaks pumping milk in a storage room that the company had converted for nursing mothers. The routine of getting dressed in real clothes and talking to adults about normal work stuff helped me feel like myself again, instead of just a milk machine and diaper changer. My coworkers were great about my flexible schedule and the times I had to leave early for pediatrician appointments. I was managing single parenthood better than I'd expected, though I still had moments late at night when Jamie was crying, and I felt overwhelmed by doing this alone. Those were the times I missed James the most, imagining how he would have walked the floors with her, or made me laugh when I was too tired to function. My parents handled the restitution payment in a way that surprised me with its practicality. Instead of waiting years for my sister to make installment payments she probably couldn't afford anyway, they essentially paid themselves back by redirecting $50,000 from what would have been her inheritance. Their attorney structured it so the money moved from the trust into their personal account, and then immediately back into the trust designated for me and Jamie. It was a creative solution that ensured I wasn't waiting around hoping my sister would actually make payments. They also established a separate trust fund for Jamie using another chunk of money they'd originally planned to leave my sister, their way of investing in the future instead of dwelling on past mistakes. When Jamie was 4 months old, my brother-in-law brought my nephew over to meet his baby cousin for the first time. I was nervous about how he'd react after everything that had happened, but he was surprisingly gentle and interested in her. He sat on my couch and let me show him how to support her head, his face serious with concentration as he held her carefully. Jamie grabbed his finger and he laughed with delight, asking me questions about what she could see and hear. After the visit, my brother-in-law pulled me aside in the kitchen and told me that having this positive family connection was helping his son understand that the problems were with his mother's choices, not with family itself. We agreed to maintain regular contact for both kids' benefit, making sure they grew up knowing each other. Anne spent several sessions helping me work through what she called the complicated process of forgiveness, which she was careful to clarify didn't mean reconciliation or forgetting what my sister had done. I was learning to release the anger that had been weighing me down like rocks in my pockets, while still maintaining firm boundaries for my protection. She had me write a letter to my sister expressing everything I needed to say, all the hurt and rage and grief that I'd never gotten to voice properly. I wrote 10 pages by hand, my pen pressing so hard it tore through the paper in places. Then Anne suggested I burn it in a small private ritual, so I did it in my backyard fire pit one evening after Jamie was asleep. Watching those pages curl and blacken felt surprisingly powerful, like I was releasing something that had been choking me. 6 months after Jamie's birth, James's mother asked if she could set up a small trust fund for her granddaughter, using money from James's life insurance policy. I was so touched by the gesture I started crying right there in her living room, understanding that this was her way of making sure James's daughter had resources for college or whatever she needed. I agreed immediately, and thanked her for thinking of Jamie's future, for wanting to provide for her the way James would have. We were building the family James would have wanted for his daughter, even though he wasn't here to see it, and that felt like honoring his memory in the most meaningful way possible. My sister completed all her probation requirements on schedule, and her attorney filed a petition to modify the protective order. She wanted permission for indirect contact at family events, so my parents could have both daughters at holidays without having to choose. I talked it over with Anne and James Morrow before agreeing to a modification that let us be at the same family gatherings, as long as she stayed on the opposite side of the room and didn't approach me directly. It wasn't forgiveness, and it definitely wasn't reconciliation, but it was practical and allowed my parents to see both of us without the constant stress of planning separate celebrations. The judge approved the modification with strict conditions about maintaining physical distance and no attempts at communication, making it clear that any violations would result in the full order being reinstated immediately. Thanksgiving arrived 6 weeks after the judge approved the modification, and I spent the morning at my parents' house helping Mom prep the turkey, while Jamie napped in the portable crib we'd set up in the guest room. My sister showed up exactly at noon with a store-bought pie, her face blank and careful as she walked through the door. She headed straight to the far corner of the living room and stayed there the entire meal, picking at her food while the rest of us tried to act normal around the dining table. Dad carved the turkey and made small talk about the weather. Mom kept jumping up to refill water glasses, and I focused on cutting Jamie's food into tiny pieces while my nephew sat between his dad and me. My sister left before dessert, mumbling something about not feeling well, and the second her car pulled out of the driveway, Mom started crying into her napkin. Dad put his arm around her shoulders and said something that stuck with me. He told her that having both daughters in the same room pretending everything was fine would be worse than this honest distance, that at least now we all knew the truth and could build something real from it. I looked down at Jamie in her high chair, smearing mashed potatoes on the tray, and realized he was right. These people around this table had proven themselves, and that mattered more than maintaining some fake version of family unity. 3 weeks later, my brother-in-law called and asked if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us, and I agreed even though I wasn't sure what he wanted to discuss. We met at the same shop where I'd met with Michael months earlier, and he seemed nervous as he stirred sugar into his coffee. He told me he'd started seeing someone, a woman he met through his son's school, and wanted to know if I was okay with her meeting Jamie at family events. I was surprised he was asking permission, but told him I appreciated him checking with me first. He suggested I meet her separately before any family gathering, and I agreed that made sense. We set up lunch for the following Saturday at a casual restaurant, and when I met her, I understood why my nephew seemed happier lately. She was patient and kind, asking thoughtful questions about my family situation without being nosy or judgmental. She told me she knew the history was complicated, and she wasn't trying to replace anyone or push her way into established relationships. I liked her immediately, and told my brother-in-law afterward that I had no problem with her being around Jamie. My nephew deserved to see his dad happy, and she seemed like someone who would be good for both of them. The next month, I enrolled in evening classes at the community college, picking up where I'd left off after James died. I'd been 2 semesters away from finishing my degree in business administration, and it felt strange sitting in a classroom again after everything that had happened. James's mother offered to watch Jamie on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and I gratefully accepted because daycare was already expensive enough without adding evening care. The first few weeks were hard, trying to remember how to study and take notes while my brain was still processing trauma and grief. But slowly, I started remembering the parts of myself that had gotten lost, the girl who'd loved learning and had plans for her future before my sister systematically destroyed them. Anne was thrilled when I told her about the classes during our weekly session, calling it clear evidence of post-traumatic growth and resilience. I was starting to believe her, starting to think that maybe I could build something meaningful from all this wreckage. Then in January, my sister's therapist forwarded a letter asking if I'd be willing to participate in a mediated conversation as part of her treatment program. I read it 3 times, feeling my stomach twist before calling Anne to discuss it. Anne suggested I also talk to Temperance, her colleague who specialized in family reconciliation, so I met with both of them over the next week to think through whether this was something I could handle. Temperance explained that mediation could be valuable for both of us if we went in with clear boundaries and realistic expectations, that it wasn't about reconciliation, but about each of us getting to say what we needed to say in a safe space. I agreed to 1 session with strict parameters, including having Temperance present as the mediator, a time limit of 90 minutes, and the understanding that this didn't change the protective order or our boundaries. The session happened on a cold February morning in Temperance's office, my sister sitting across from me looking smaller than I remembered. She apologized for what she'd done, but even as she spoke, I could hear the subtle ways she deflected responsibility, saying she'd been struggling with mental health issues and didn't fully understand the impact of her actions. There were a few moments where something that looked like genuine remorse crossed her face, particularly when she talked about lying to James before he died, and those moments felt real even if the rest felt scripted. I told her I accepted her apology but that it didn't change anything between us, that I needed the distance to protect myself and my daughter. When I left, I felt like it had been worthwhile, even though it didn't resolve anything or make me want to rebuild our relationship. At least I'd gotten to say my piece and she'd heard it directly from me instead of through lawyers and family members. Jamie's first birthday party in March was everything I'd hoped for, a celebration of survival and new beginnings with everyone who'd supported us through the darkest time. James's mother made a beautiful cake decorated with purple and yellow butterflies, telling me they symbolized transformation and new life. My parents showed up relaxed and smiling, so different from the tense, walking on eggshells people they'd been during my childhood, when they were always managing my sister's moods and demands. Marco flew in from his new duty station in Georgia, bringing a huge stuffed bear and a photo album he'd put together showing Jamie's daddy in his uniform with his army buddies. He sat with me after cake and told stories about James, the funny things he'd said and done, the way he'd talked about coming home to me and starting our family. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. The kind that comes from remembering someone you loved instead of avoiding the memories because they're too painful. During the party, my nephew asked if he could call me Aunt Katie, something he hadn't done since before everything happened. I told him of course he could, trying not to cry, and he threw his arms around me in a tight hug before running off to play with Jamie's new toys. My brother-in-law found me in the kitchen a few minutes later and thanked me quietly for maintaining the connection, despite everything his ex-wife had done. He said it gave his son a sense of family stability and helped him understand that the problems were with his mother's choices, not with family itself. I was glad I could do that for him, glad that something good was coming out of all this pain. 18 months after Jamie's birth, I walked across the stage at the community college graduation ceremony, accepting my degree while my parents and James's mother cheered from the audience. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of everything that had happened, but it represented reclaiming my future from my sister's sabotage. I was considering graduate school eventually, maybe getting an MBA, but for now I was focused on being present for Jamie and continuing to heal from everything we'd been through. 2 years after that night on the porch when my sister confessed everything, I had a stable job as an office manager, a happy toddler who was starting to talk in full sentences, and people around me who genuinely loved and supported me. My relationship with my parents were better than it had ever been, built on honesty instead of the illusion they'd maintained for so long. James's mother was Grammy to Jamie, showing up for every milestone and doctor's appointment, and Marco was Uncle Marco, who sent cards and presents from wherever the army stationed him. My sister and I maintained careful distance at family events, staying on opposite sides of the room and leaving if things got too uncomfortable. The protective order had expired, but I kept her at arm's length by choice now, not because a court said I had to. I started dating someone I met through work about 6 months ago, a guy from the accounting department who asked me to lunch one day, and somehow made me laugh despite my complicated history. We were taking it slow because I had a lot of baggage and a toddler to think about, but Jamie adored him, and he was patient with my boundaries and need to protect my daughter. Life wasn't perfect, and I still had hard days when the weight of everything that happened felt crushing, but I was genuinely happy in a way I never thought possible 2 years ago. My sister's attempts to destroy me had ultimately freed me to build an authentic life surrounded by people who saw and valued the real me, and I was raising my daughter in truth rather than manipulation. That felt like the best revenge and the best healing all at once. That's the story and the small lesson tucked inside. I love when these moments actually turn into something you can use in real life. Even if it's tiny, that spark matters. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next.